Hello, welcome to one of my videos. I thought that tonight I would go back to basics and make a square. And I had been watching one of my videos on the knitted angel pocket, and it has been quite a while since I've knitted a basic square. And so I got out my needles and my yarn, and here we go. And I wrote out the pattern. This is a DK, but it's a thick DK, and I love using it. This particular one is from ALDI. Poundland also has a nice thick blue DK. Some are very, very thin, and so I would suggest that you would go down needle sizes if your yarn is thin. And if you want to knit it in an Aran yarn, which is even thicker than this, then go up needle size. So basically adjust your needle size so that your knitting can hold its body. If your needles are too big, then your knitting will be very floppy. Unless you want to make a floppy blanket, then that's fine. But if it's a square and you're going to be putting it into many squares into a blanket, then you want it to have a certain amount of shape that could hold together. So let's get going. I'm not going to knit a huge square. I'm going to make it small, and you just increase it to whatever size you want. If you have circular needles, you can knit and knit and knit and knit and knit until it's the size of a blanket. A good idea is to weigh your wool first, your yarn, your wool, your acrylic, and give yourself an margin of error. So if you have 500 grams and you want to knit a blanket, then don't go over 250 before you get halfway. So divide your yarn up and then give yourself a bit of a margin of error. So go up to say 240 grams and then knit down, because sometimes we knit looser or tighter when we are decreasing or when we're increasing. Every knitter is different, and you would be sad to actually run out of yarn. So that's just a little tip. But we're making squares, small squares, so we don't have that problem. I'm using a 4mm. These are Pony Child knitting needles, aluminium. I found them on eBay, and they are fantastic. When they first arrive, they have like a type of rough feeling to them, but as soon as you start using them, they become as smooth as silk, and I have been using them non-stop for a couple of years, and I absolutely love them. So I have them in all the different sizes available. So let's get started. You can take a screenshot of that, and then at least you have it in your digital memory. We're going to cast on 3 stitches. Cast on anywhere you like. When I cast on, I make a slip knot. I usually cast on with 2 needles. If I've got a lot of stitches, I do. But in this case, I'm only going to cast on with 1 needle because I want my cast on to be tight. And it is a square, and you want to have a bit of a point at the end. So I've got my cast on with 3. We'll be working with garter stitch throughout. So the first row is a knit row. There's no increase, and that is just to anchor the cast on. There we go. Now we're going to start with the pattern, and the pattern is I'm going to slip the first stitch, then I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to pick up the loop and knit to the end. So you'll see what I mean. I slip the first stitch, I knit the next stitch, I pick up the loop, and this is the loop from the previous row. Now it's sitting on the left hand needle, so obviously I will be knitting it. Not obvious, so that's what I'm explaining. And I turn the work and I repeat that. I slip the first, knit the next, whoops, I pick up the loop with my left hand needle, I knit it. Yeah, I use my finger. That's just how it goes, especially when I'm right at the beginning of a row or when I'm working with a few stitches. Slip the first, knit the second, pick up the loop, knit to the end. I have a table underneath me, so these needles are bumping on it. Slip the first, knit the next, pick up the loop, knit to the end. And that is the pattern for the increase. Slip, keeping very much attention. I mean, I have the yarn in this hand, so I can. I don't know how you would do it if you have the yarn in the other hand. So it's slip, knit, pick up, slip, knit, pick up, slip, knit, pick up. I suggest you write it on a piece of paper, and if you're going to be sitting knitting somewhere, then you just have that, and then at least it'll be a little reminder. Unless you have an excellent memory, I don't, so I do like to have my pieces of paper everywhere. As I change different patterns and I have different techniques, I sometimes need to remind myself which technique and which pattern I'm using. I've been knitting aliens for the last month, but I have such a big batch of them now. And they have been washed today, and when they're dried, they will be shipped to France. And I thought I'd go back to doing something just really simple, not having to think. So I'm going to be knitting up some squares. Many charities here in the UK ask for squares. Each charity asks for different sizes. They usually ask for 6 inches, which is approximately 15 centimeters. If you are knitting for a local charity, then you just need to ask them what size they prefer. And to measure your square, you'll see in the pattern I wrote out, you need to measure the side. Sometimes we think we need to measure across where the needles are, but if you want to measure how big your square is, measure the side. There will be a little bit of give, and once you finish knitting it, you might find it's a little bit bigger than you thought. And if you're making a lot of squares, then write down how many stitches you had on your last row of increase, and then you can adjust it for the following squares. You can add or you can decrease the amount of stitches, and that way, if you have bought yourself a bunch of wool in this the same brand of wool, you will be able to make a whole pile of squares that are identical. Of course, the weather also will change how our hands are on the needle, whether they're slipping or not, and that can also change the tension. So sometimes some of your squares will be a little bit bigger, sometimes a little bit smaller. There are many things that can change our tension. But once you find a rhythm, then they should even out, and you should be able to get a pile of squares that are very similar. But if they are for a charity, then it doesn't matter, because they will mix and match them into different blankets. And if you want to change colors, just make sure your yarn is the same thickness and it also has the same spring. Some yarns are more springy, bouncy than other yarns. And it would be a shame if you made, some people want to make one side of the square one color, so which means that you basically change yarns when you've finished increasing, and then they make the other side a different color. But just check that they are the same type of yarn. They're knit up in the same way and they have the same feel. Otherwise your square will be lopsided. If you're making stripes, you can change the color at the end of each row. So for instance, I finish this row and I'd have the other color waiting for me here. And then I would knit the next row, and if you want to have 3 colors, then you have 1 color at the end of each row. And so every time you complete a row, there'll be a color waiting for you. If you're making 2 colors, then you'll have 2 rows per color. Unless you're working with double pointed needles, then you can change color every row, because you'll just literally slip your work to the end and pick up the yarn of the other color. So if these were double pointed needles and I had my tail of I had my other yarn or tail, my other ball here, I would just slip my work across, turn it over, and then I would work that color. Then when I got here, I'd have 2 tails, and then I could decide which color I wanted to use. But you can play around. If you have double pointed needles, you can play around with your colors. So you continue this way till you have the desired size. But as this is a demonstration video and I've already been going for 11 minutes and chatting, I will now go on to the next part. This is a little patch. It can be used for a lot of things. If you make little tiny squares, you can also knit them together or sew them together. You could use a patch for anything. If you have grandchildren or you know someone, then if you make it a small one, they can have a little doll's blanket. So where are we? Now here, this is optional, knit 1 row. This is basically the between your increases and your decreases. Some people like to knit 1 row and some people don't. You'll see how you feel. I've put it in there. I've put it into the pattern. So I'm basically going to knit 1 row, and that will be the middle of my work. So I'll slip a stitch and I knit a row, no increase, no decrease. Oops. See, when I lose my rhythm, it's like an old car that's always sputters when it starts. But once I get going, it's fine. Come to the end of the row, turn the work. Sometimes we can actually forget if we're increasing or decreasing, and we can, well, I do sometimes. If I'm not concentrating, I can decrease for 2 rows, forget, and then I start increasing again. So sometimes I put a little stitch marker here, something like this, and that's basically to remind me that now I'm decreasing. So when I see that, I go, oh yes, okay. It's like tying a little knot in your handkerchief. How do we decrease? The pattern is slip 1, knit 2 together, knit to the end until I have 3 stitches left. Slip 1. Of course, your knitting technique is completely different from mine. I'm knitting 2 together, but I need to slip them off the needle and put them back on so that they're lying the correct way. So just excuse me. Knit 2 and to the end. So if you can hear the noise in the background, it's my neighbor. She's very vocal. Put another marker here because then obviously each time I come to the row I know that there's something happening. Slip, knit two together, knit to the end. If you want to make a rectangle, you would knit one row. You could knit 5, 10, 20, 25 rows, as many as you want. And then you'd have a rectangle. So if you want to make a little blanket for a baby, for a doll, you make a little one, but you want it to be a rectangle, then that's how you would do it. Have a kind of diamondy shape. I don't think I've got that right. What if I'm talking nonsense now? Actually, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. How did I do those rectangles? How did I? You have to excuse me for that because that is not right. I have to work out what I'm talking about. There was something there. I was making lozenges. That's what I was doing. But there is a way to use this corner to corner and make it into a rectangle. Gotta keep the same amount of stitches. I'm going to scratch my head about it. I definitely have done that. And maybe I'll make a video on how to make a rectangle. Because for the incubators, the incubator babies, they I think they want 18 inches by 12 inches, I believe it is. Depending on what charity you're knitting for, if you are knitting for a charity, they will specify what size they need. And many of them do want very, very plain knitting. Nothing fancy, no holes. So this technique, it doesn't create holes on the side. So it is ideal for preemie babies, incubators, and premature babies. And of course, as I said, it's also ideal for making squares if you want to make them into, if you want to attach them all to blankets, or if you want to make the squares for charity, then this pattern is foolproof. Foolproof, yes, that's correct. It's called corner to corner. As you see, it goes quite quickly. Sometimes we can be ambitious and we think, oh, well, I'm going to do a corner to corner and I'm going to do 180 stitches. There comes a point where one can get very, very tired of all those stitches. And also the interesting thing is one's tension does actually change when the blanket gets heavier. And one needs to keep an eye out for that, because then what happens is the middle stitches, because if one is going quickly, or if one has, say for instance, 100 or 200 stitches one's working across, one's technique can be slightly different on large quantities of stitches, and then the center part of the blanket will be looser than the edges. And that's something to keep your eye open for if you are planning to do a large corner to corner. So a good idea is to start with something smaller. As I said, they can always find a use for it. If you do this in cotton, then it is ideal for dishcloths. This is the classic dishcloth, corner to corner dishcloth. And if you do it in pure wool, 100% pure wool, you can use them as oven, to catch hot pots and stuff. But then I would suggest you use a much smaller needle so that it is fairly compact. My grandmother used to crochet our oven. It's not actually a mitt. It's like a little pot holder that she made those. She used to make them in pairs. But hers were always crocheted. And very effective. One wouldn't think, because it wasn't very thick, but 100% wool and using the right stitch, very effective. She used to make little loops on the end. On Facebook, if you're on Facebook, there's many groups that do, they focus basically just on dishcloths, and they have some wonderful patterns and suggestions and techniques. So they're worth looking at, and many of them do corner to corner. But they have all kinds of variations and tips and tricks. So if you like making squares and you probably didn't think of it, of actually the dishcloth groups, that's a little tip for you. Also, if you hear on YouTube, if you put in dishcloth corner to corner or dishcloth knitting or something like that, you also get some lovely patterns. And as I said, if you just change the size, it can go from a dishcloth into a small blanket. I'm coming down to the amount of stitches, and we've been chatting nicely. Well, I've been chatting. Just if I chat, then it goes quickly and very smoothly. Coming down to the last 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to knit 1 row. That's also optional. Slip first. I shouldn't have said knit 1 row, I should say slip 1. Okay, there we go. And cut my yarn. So at the end, knit 1 row, cut, thread through, loop, sew away ends. So I actually slipped 1 and knitted 2. Let me use a big one to get it through. I personally prefer to come through from the other end. So what I do is I pinch, I hold, coming from the other end. Pull. As I said, you can skip that last knit 1 row if you want to. It's not a perfect end. There are other ways of doing it and other techniques. I'm looking for a sharp pointed one because I want to show in my tails. So I need to look where my loop is. There are the loops. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back up. And that's going to pull it in. So you see how it's pulled it in? It's taken away that sharp point. It's made it a bit more flat like that side. If people are going to be sewing and knitting these together as a blanket, you don't want your thread to be bulking up the side. So you'd rather, and that's why these sharp pointed needles are perfect, you'd rather work it away somewhere else. I'm going to unravel it a bit, and then what I'm going to do is just scraping and making a noise. Try and follow the stitches. It's not that easy to work away on garter. If you want to be really professional, no, I don't know what the right word would be. If you want to do it in a way that you really won't see it, and I tend to always do this when I'm working with baby clothes, because the baby won't be lying on the scissor blanket if it's for an incubator. But if I'm making baby clothes or preemie clothes, then what I do is I divide up the different plies and I work each one away individually. And you just keep an eye on which direction you're going, so you don't cut the tails off until you've worked all of them away. And it also gives you a lot more freedom because you're literally working with one tiny fiber. Whereas if you had all three, it becomes quite obvious where you've put it. If you have one, it's not obvious where it goes. So let's just try and follow the... I've still got my chenille needle. eBay, chenille, CHENILLE. That's where I buy my stuff all from eBay, but if you have a different outlet that you buy from. So you see, you worked it away. You can't see it anyway. Look at that. That's how I like it. Takes a little bit longer, but if you have put hours and hours and hours into your blanket or your square, then that, I would say, the extra 10 minutes of dividing up your tails, because you'll have them on each side. So this has got a 3-ply, and go through to the other side. Sorry, bump up, stand. There's no reason I can't work on this side. My tail's long enough. Sometimes if one's not generous with the tail, it can be a little bit tricky to work it away afterwards. And because I haven't cut the tails, I can see where I've gone. So I want to go straight all the way up to there. Whoops, sorry about that. So I'm lifting this up closer to me. And it's bumping. If I'm doing lots of these, then I start to develop a pattern of where I would go. But as it's been such a long time, I'm actually being quite random about what direction I'm going in. Remember, once you cut it, it's going to have a little bit of a blunt end. You can cut it at an angle. Okay, so for instance, cut it. There's a bit of a blunt end there. As well, see if I can cut it at an angle. It's so thin, it's almost like not even, I don't even have to bother. That one's nice. See, like frayed. You won't even see it when it goes in. Once you tug it in, see that? Beautiful, huh? It's fun when when one can hide the tails. Okay, take these markers out. I'll just repeat the process with this one. Should take 5 minutes. Okay. Still unwrap and twist it a bit. So this is the cast on. I don't want to go back in there because that's where the stitch comes from. So I bumped it, so I want to go around. A plan of action. This one will go up this side. And I'll weave across. It seems to decide to go that way. And this one I'll go up the other side. Okay, on this one, yeah, I don't need to do that. Do it on this side. I said it's been a while since I've worked away in garter stitch, and it's just taking a while to come back to me. So one's already fraying. It's not going to last long. Cut my nails, so I can't pick up my scissors anymore. That nail there is my pick up scissors nail. It's too short. That's not too bad considering I haven't done it for over a year. Yeah, that cast off, that probably that extra rows. Just that's optional. I'd say that is a fairly good pattern, especially for starters, and one can explore different colors, and if you want to, you can actually change colors maybe somewhere away from the edges, just so that you can have that beautiful edge for sewing up. But yes, play around and explore, and thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.